Hello, Wobbly Phil here. The 1970s were a boom time for weird and wonderful motorcycles that either had a limited production run or never got much further than the prototype stage. One manufacturer that was keen to up the ante back then was Kawasaki. They had been pipped at the post to an inline four by Honda. Later, Kawasaki hit back in style with the iconic Z1, and by the end of the decade had even produced the six-cylinder Z1300. But there was another direction the big green one might have gone in. This is the story of the Kawasaki Square 4. For the first half of the 20th century, Kawasaki mostly built ships, trains and aircraft. It was a relative newcomer to motorcycles, only really getting going in the mid-1960s, following its bailout of Meguro Motorcycles, one of hundreds of Japanese companies that flourished in the 1950s and early 1960s, making copycat BSAs and Harleys.
The streets of Kawasaki.
But by the early 1970s, Kawasaki was innovating in all kinds of areas. In 1972, it came up with the world's first jet ski. In fact, jet ski was what Kawasaki called it, and even today those two words are a Kawasaki-registered trademark. So now you know who to blame when your summer doze on the beach is shattered by swarms of jet skiers. That's jet with a capital J and skiers with a capital S. Team Green were also ahead of the pack in 1971 when they launched the two-stroke 750cc inline triple H2 Mach IV with a top speed of 120 miles per hour. The four-stroke inline-four Z1 upped the ante in 1972, allegedly topping 130 miles an hour. The Z1 project had been given the in-house codename New York Steak, but the Kawasaki obsession with red meat didn't stop there. Kawasaki's Steak Tartare project was in the development kitchen. Their head chef, Hiroyuki Matsumoto, was in charge of design, and the objective was to put a 750cc two-stroke liquid-cooled Square 4 on the menu. It even had a secret code number, 0280. Yamaha and Suzuki were tinkering with Wankel rotary engines to varying degrees of success, and even Honda and Kawasaki had considered it too, so Kawasaki's decision to go with a Square 4 was bold, to say the least. Square 4s hadn't been a thing since the innovative four-stroke aerial Square 4 was originally conceived by the legendary British bike designer Edward Turner. That had gone through a few iterations before finally succumbing in 1959 to the onslaught of newer technology. It was improved and revived briefly by Square 4 fans George and Tim Healy in the 1970s, producing an incredibly light and nimble bike, but it's thought they sold only 11 complete machines. More than 40 years on from the start of the aerial Square 4, a two-stroke Square 4 seemed like a backward step, but perhaps not if you take into account the fact that Kawasaki was aiming to make the fastest production machine on the planet. Could an extra pot bring Kawasaki even more speed and kudos than the three-cylinder Mach IV? Bike journalists at the time reported that Kawasaki were aiming for 75 bhp, a tad more than the Mach IV and almost as much as the Z1, and had even gone some way towards equipping it with an electric start and fuel injection. It was said to be incredibly smooth, with its setup achieving a complete combustion cycle in each cylinder for every revolution of the crank. A racing version had even been spotted clocking impressive times on the track. We'll never know for sure because the project was killed off in the mid-1970s. Emissions laws were tightening and two-strokes were going out of fashion faster than platform shoes. There were technical issues too, such as cooling the rear two pots, something the aerial Square 4s had issues with in the early days. All that remains are contemporary photos of the prototype and the prototype itself, which is preserved in Kawasaki's Good Times World museum in Kobe, Japan. The concept baby was not entirely thrown out with the bathwater. Just a few years later, in 1980, Kawasaki rolled out the KR500 race bike, running on a 500cc square 4 two-stroke engine, which won 6 consecutive races to take the British ACU 500cc title in 1982. But wait, it turns out you could have bought a square 4 two-stroke 40 years ago after all, not with the Kawasaki badge, but rather with the Suzuki name on it. Suzuki made the RG Gamma 500 between 1985 and 1987. Strictly speaking, it was a U4, not a square 4, but I'm afraid explaining the difference is well beyond the pay grade of a mechanical nincompoop like me. It apparently pumped out almost 100 bhp, a crazy amount of power for a machine with a dry weight of only 340 pounds, and could reach an insane top speed of almost 150 miles per hour. Kawasaki decided the Square 4 was the wrong bike at the wrong time, which is a shame. A world-class manufacturer like Kawasaki could have turned this unusual configuration into a world-beating bike. Or could it? After all, Suzuki had little success with its innovative rotary R5 and had to make constant improvements throughout the R5's short production run. Meanwhile, 4-stroke inline 4s were attracting the development bucks and were delivering the smoothness and power that these quirkier machines had set out to address in the first place. Perhaps Kawasaki's Square 4 was just another of those exciting engineering roads that was always going to culminate in a technological dead end. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing to let YouTube know we're doing something right here at 3 Phils. Thank you.